I'd like to now introduce our first speaker and get this conference started. I'm looking around for Dr. Jackson. He's not here yet? There you are. Hi there. Come on in. Either way, Dr. Jackson is a professor of public health at UCLA and a pediatrician. He's widely recognized. Let's see, where are we? I should have this memorized by now, Dr. Jackson. For his work on laws to reduce risks from pesticides, especially to farm workers and to children. Dr. Jackson served as the director of the CDC's National Center for Environmental Health for 9 years. He's received a number of awards during his career, including the Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Public Health Law Association and New Partners for Smart Growth, as well as the John Heinz Award for Leadership in the Environment. You can see the span of his expertise. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Jackson and getting this conference started. Thank you so much.
This is great fun. On 9/11, 2001, when I was head of the Center for Environmental Health, the Emergency Response and Disaster Group was in the National Center. And I really struggled because we were working 18 hours a day for months. But I also, during that time, kind of struggled with depression. Just feeling, I have 2 second-degree relatives, firefighters, that died during the collapse of the World Trade Center. And honestly, I have to tell you the truth. For some reason, not 9/11, but 11/9, I went into a depression. And I am just now coming out of it, and in part because I'm here with you, and I've had a great week. And yesterday I had a chance to talk to the futures in, this is foolish, I agreed to give a talk yesterday in Seattle to the meteorologists, and today to, and 4,000 of them, and today to be with old friends, and to have a panel that's following me with Howie Frumkin, who is a co-author and a deep expert around lots of these issues, but also built environment, especially built environment and health. Sam Myers, who taught me that the things I'm worried about actually go across about 9 different domains, whether it's soils, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, the finance cycle, etc. And Sam will be speaking to us. It's going to be an amazing group. And Ricky Pereira, who is the spectacular leader on toxics issues. Oh my God, what do I talk about in a half an hour to tee up the things that I'm really worried about? And, oh no, will this, oh, maybe I have to open up myself. Any of you, actually one of the things that cheered me up was Saturday. And we went to the demonstration in Oakland, California. I live in Berkeley, and there were 85,000 people in Oakland. There had never been such a large demonstration, even after the World Series wins in Oakland. It was amazing. And, but one of the shots you see people next to, oh, come on. You saw people demonstrating next to the National Gallery of Art, particularly the Eastern Gallery, and in that room there's a spectacular skylight. It's one of the most beautiful IMP design skylights, and below it hangs, I think, one of the most amazing pieces of architecture in America, Alexander Calder's Mobile. And I actually think there's a message in this Mobile for all of us. One of the things I love about it is that great big panel, the pedal as they're called, holds up the next 6. The thing collapses without it. And the next one holds up the next 5 and the 4. And if you pull down one of them and say, this is the most important one, the thing doesn't work anymore. It is the balance that really matters. So that's going to be the theme of my talk, that it is the balance that really matters. One of the things that's just stunning to me, go to the JPL website in Real Earth right now, and they will show you a picture of the Earth as it looks, computed up over the last 5 or 6 days. And the new satellite, GOES 16 now, is creating real pictures in real color and are being reproduced every 3 or 4 days, brand new ones. So, and then it gets down to very deep detail. So the technology that's evolving that can tell us about the world we're in is really remarkable. But it also, and Jim Lovell talked about this, looking at the planet from a distance and realizing that beautiful blue marble is all we have. Everything in your body is from that planet. We belong to that planet. In fact, our intellect, helped by the internet, is the mind of the planet. The unitary mind of this planet are the human beings. And so thinking about this in a much more holistic way, and the gift that we are given to live at a time like this and to bring our children into this world. And my friend Jim Kunstler once said, I'm not worried about the future of the planet because, the planet will shake off the human race the way an old dog shakes off fleas. It will get by just fine without us. We've really got to figure out how to get along with the planet. But Joan and I have 3 children. And Brendan was born in 1981. He's a doc at CDC now. That's 35 years, 36 years. He has never lived in a colder than average year in his entire lifetime. Every young person's never experienced a colder than average lifetime, averaged over, the last 140 years where we had good numbers. Everyone really depends on it, farmers and all the rest. The implications of this change in the planet, the temperature of the planet, is going to affect absolutely every industry and every state in our country. This is the length of the growing season, and look at about 1980, the time I started working, 1970s when I started working public health, the growing season is increased by about 2 weeks. That's not that long a time. This is kind of an ugly picture, but this is a big deal. The oceans are the sink for the CO2 that we produce, and they're the sink for a lot of the heat that we produce. And to see this kind of increase in the zillions of joules, I can't now remember now what Z stands for, of energy content in the oceans is really very remarkable. And something even more shocking to me about this is the human species has changed the pH of the oceans. You look at the planet. My grandson picked it up one day and said, hey, Grandpa, if I turn the globe this way, I can see that there's no land on planet Earth. There's all ocean. And he was right. Think about the immensity of the oceans. And we've changed the pH of the oceans. They've become more acidic because of the dissolving of CO2 in our oceans. You've all seen the pictures of Greenland. I won't go through it. Al Gore did a wonderful job with this. But the Mulans that are capturing an amount of water that's probably the equivalent of 3 or 4 Mississippis every single day that are melting off Greenland and dropping into these holes in the ice and coming to the bottom and the surface between the ice and the rock of Greenland, and then propelling the ice much more rapidly across and into the Atlantic Ocean is, and you've all seen the decline in the ice shields in the Arctic and Antarctic. But every picture you look at of planet Earth, this is the latest one I could get with 6 months accumulated temperatures across the planet, I'm always intrigued by the fact that there's that blue spot up near Greenland. And I think it's those Mississippi's worth of 200,000-year-old, absolutely pure, clean, former ice water hitting the North Atlantic. And what that can do to the duodecal circulation and the Gulf Stream and to Europe is really quite profound. I won't go into this because there were other people talking about this in more length, but it worries me very deeply about the world that I'm giving my children and my grandchildren. We had the first two little girls in my entire patrilineage in 130 years, Maeve and Catherine, at the house for Christmas, and I looked at how beautiful they were and how much I worried about what are we doing. This increase in the temperature on the planet, there are things that are just obvious what's going on. If you put people in buildings that were designed for heat waves, like in, for cold weather, like in Chicago with a blacktop roof and very poor ventilation, and the people are poor and they've got very few friends and they don't own air conditioning, and people die. And when I was at CDC, we had 4 epidemiologists go up to Chicago in 1995, and I'll tell you, I did go up later. There's like nothing more unnerving than to drive into the coroner's parking lot and see 5 or 6 freezer trucks completely filled with wooden boxes with corpses in them from this kind of outbreak. And there was a lot of denial, oh, this isn't really going on. And there's actually, when you go upstream, some of the big causes of this, one is that we should have made air conditioners more available. 2 is energy efficiency of air conditioners would have been very important. The SEER ratings were not forced to be more stringent, more protective several years before that. Oh, why do we need more efficient air conditioners? Well, one of the reasons was we were getting huge brownouts because the more efficient air conditioners wouldn't have been drawing quite so much current. As the other thing, and Mayor Bloomberg's been very good about this, is silver top roofs and heat alerts and the rest for people. But this is the most obvious impacts of climate. And I talked a lot about and thanked the meteorologists for stepping up. The sad news is a significant portion of the practicing meteorologists, I have a feeling that it may be a blow driver effect and it makes them stupid, don't believe in climate change. And so really getting that message across is going to be very, very important. So when I was at CDC, we talked about viral infections and Anopheles mosquitoes and other kinds of mosquitoes and dengue, et cetera, moving into the United States. And that worried me. We didn't know about Zika back then. I worried about immersion of major countries like Bangladesh, the salination of their aquifers and the loss of the rice crops. That's 180 million people looking for a place to live. And if the Brahmaputra and the Ganges dry up, in part because the Himalayan ice sheet is much thinner than it used to be, we're looking at far less water being available. Look at how difficult the world has found handling 500,000 refugees from Syria. Those heartbreaking pictures of the 4-year-old on the beach and the rest. People drowning in the Mediterranean. And then imagine what will happen when 1,000 times that number is looking for a place to live. And, you know, it won't happen in my lifetime, but it could well happen in my granddaughter's lifetime. So the other thing I learned at CDC, because we had the disaster thing, but we also had the Refugee and International Health Group, we would have people, and I had one of the docs who I admired very much, went to Afghanistan after the war and immunized more children in 3 months than the United States had immunized in the previous 5 years. It's just measles, all the rest. Slept on mud floors the whole time. And I just tried to give her all kinds of awards. I tried to get her a first-class ticket coming back and a stay in Hawaii, but the United States government thought that I was being frivolous, that I would allow anybody to have a break coming back after this kind of work. And she was thin and really very ill at the time she came back. He said, Dick, you have no idea what goes on when large populations are moving. And something I didn't know about, the amount of violence that occurs between individuals and particularly towards women that went on during that time. I had no idea. And they were dealing with STDs, things that they never imagined would be occurring because of this enormous social disruption. And then we're going to multiply that by 1,000. So this is the one I worry about most in terms of climate change. So that first pedal, if you will, that's holding everything else up is nature and the natural world that I've just described. And I have a good friend, Charlie, he says, you know, you have to realize, Dick, Mother Nature always bats last. And we can pretend that Mother Nature isn't in charge, oh boy. But the next pedal is culture. And this is, what's he talking about? But in many ways, what we're dealing with in the United States and other places is wars between cultures. At the obvious level, culture is how we raise our children, how we decide what we're going to eat, how we treat animals, how we treat the natural world, how we treat leaders, how we treat poor people, how we treat people with physical defects or who are weaker. That's all part of our culture, and they're parts of the American culture I revere and admire and very proud of in terms of our culture. Actually, there's a wonderful book called Seeds of Albion, which is all about how the various cultures in the United States, particularly ones that are derivative from England, the Puritan culture had a certain effect, particularly in New England. The Quaker effect all around, and it had very much effect on the Revolution around Philadelphia. The Cornwall and Southwest effect that was the Tidewater in Virginia and other places, and then the last was the Scots-Irish. And the reason the Scots-Irish, I say this because it's my ancestry, were such rambunctious people is they were living in a place where you could not trust government. The only people you could trust was the clan and the family, and the women could fight as hard as the men could because you had to be really tough to get by. And you know the whole thing about hillbillies, but these were tough people, and they're the backbone of the American military in many ways. So culture, and culture's so real, we don't even know that it's dictating who we are and how we behave, because it's like how he says, fish don't know there's water, because that's what it is. So the average American thinks it's normal to build a garage and attach a dwelling for people to it. This is what we build, 2 to 3 million of these garages every year, and attach people to them because we've created an entire social structure that revolves around the automobile. It's 25% of the GDP of the United States is cars and vehicles. We then think it's normal for a child to be isolated in the suburbs or on a cul-de-sac for the first 17 years of her life and have to ask mom, take me to the mall, take me somewhere all the time, and be in a complete infantilized state of dependence until they're handed the keys to the car and then expected to act like a mature adult. This I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. My sister Kathy lives town nearby, Nutley. And I won't say my niece's name, but daughter's name, but so Kath is taking the girl for her HPV vaccine. Do you think it's good? Yeah, I think all vaccines are good. Get anyone you can. And we've all had friends that have had cervical cancer and other things. Get the HPV vaccine. Old people my age have known this. She goes, well, the parents are giving me a hard time. Why are you doing that? That will encourage them to have sex. So I said, no, blah, 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 blah. Then an hour later, we're in this conversation. She's talking about the movies that these parents are taking their 13, 14, and 15-year-old daughters to, and they're out buying thong underwear for 14-year-old girls and sending all this meta message about the hypersexualization of young girls at the same time pretending that you don't need to protect yourself. So our culture is very complex about this. I have another set of nieces that live out in Pleasanton, California, who have never ridden BART, and they're afraid to get on a BART train because I feel much safer in my enclave, totally unprepared for the real world. I love them, they're great girls, but this is not good preparation for life. So the average person in America, we were talking at this other meeting, and I've been asked to do a review of the new book on the Beltline and the redevelopment of Atlanta, and I came to the conclusion after living in Atlanta for a few years that Atlanta was fattening, because everybody that moves to Atlanta gains 15 pounds, and it's partly a mix of the food and the fact that you can't walk anywhere, and half the parks you even have to be in a car to get in a park. And it's what Howie and I became so obsessed with the built environment, how it influences our health. This, by the way, is where the National Center for Environmental Health, where Pat Bricey is now, doesn't have a sidewalk for 5 straight miles, and it's lined with thousands of very poor people trying to get from one place to another, struggling in the mud and all the rest. I now teach at UCLA. I've been down there about 8 years. This was the city of the future, you know. And it's La La Land, by the way, if you haven't seen that movie. it was, what a relief. It made me laugh, and I needed that at a certain time. And the dancing was kind of clumsy, but it actually looked like they were even more in love than if the dancing had been too Fred and Ginger. So, but this is really the reality in Los Angeles, and we say we have the Highway 405 because it only moves between 4 and 4:05 in the morning. And every conversation is deeply boring because the first thing that people talk about at any party is either the price of their house or how long it takes to get absolutely anywhere. I barely can go to work, and if I want to go to the Hollywood Bowl, which is about 10 miles away and a wonderful thing, basically you've committed 5 hours to just getting there. So we just passed, relevant to what's going on and culture, we just passed Proposition M, Measure M, $60 billion for upgrades to infrastructure, and we're not sitting back waiting for the federal government to come through, or for that matter, the state government to come through, because we have to do it. And it's really going to happen if we get the Olympics in 2024. We build schools in the old days that actually worked pretty well. We're energy efficient, we're day lit, we're ventilated, had bare floors, weren't allergenic, and 90% of the kids could walk to school, and now we build schools that are medium security prisons. And my kids went to the one that looks almost identical to the one at the bottom right. There wasn't a window in the damn place. And they had guards coming into the building, and they didn't have doors on the toilets in the bathrooms because there was so much stuff going on. This is some preparation for life, maybe for the Marine Corps, but not much else. So we've seen a decline in the physical activity of our kids, and kids walking and biking to school over time. That's our culture. I have a right to be in a car. I have a right to 16-ounce steaks. I have a right to this sort of thing, and I want to live in my isolated home. Here's 2 cities. Exact same population. One's 40 times or so bigger than the other. Now, where would you want to live? One is Atlanta, and one is Barcelona. And the carbon footprint in Barcelona per person is 10 times less. And everyone thinks, oh, you know, if I reduce my carbon footprint, my life will go to hell. And a lot of people in Barcelona couldn't imagine living in a place where you had to do absolutely everything in a car, including buying a carton of milk. So part of our culture is we have a God-given right to eat as much as we possibly can, and the advertising industry has a God-given right to tell us to do this. So when you turn on the Super Bowl, there are the 4 major ads will be Coke, Pepsi, Chevy, and Ford, and 2 of them will have very beautiful people sitting on a couch, eating junk, eating lots of carbohydrates, and somehow they didn't get fat, and they're all in good shape because they only pick healthy people to sit on the couch during the advertisements. And the other 2 people will get in cars and drive around like they're out in the country, even though in Los Angeles, no one. By the way, in Los Angeles, it now takes longer to get downtown in a Lamborghini than it does in the old trolleys that were across the city 50 years ago because you can't go fast. But this is our culture, you know, and it's great stuff. But part of our culture is we don't take care of things going forward, and then we pay for it at the doctor's office. And so we are the absurdly most costly, medically costly country in the world. That red dot is, generally, the more money you spend on medical care, in ways, people live longer. You can't see all the details. But here's the U.S. Now it's $10,000 per capita for medical care, and we're living about 78 years. And by the way, did you see the latest stats? We're seeing a slight drop now in life expectancies. So I was in this room, in this hotel, 10 years ago talking at this meeting and predicting that things were going to get better, and we were going to see some real changes in health. So here is a 20-year snapshot of the healthy American people using NHANES, a really powerful study. And it's a look at people who are the age of about half the people in this room, and they compared them with people in the same age group 20 years before. And did they get better or worse? So NHANES in 1990, do you think excellent health went up or down in the United States? Big time. You need help to go about your life? Yeah, I have limitations. Do you need a wheelchair or a cane? Think of the cost of that. Just these are people in the prime economic and earning years of life, and we've doubled the percentage of our population needing assistance. You know, of course, the next two. Smoking went down, obesity went up, but you don't or didn't, and I didn't know the next one. We physicians have been wagging our fingers at people saying, you gotta walk, you gotta exercise, you gotta get out. And we've really been successful, haven't we? It went from 17% to 52%, at least it didn't even go to 100%. And really, and Howie and I talk about this a lot, and you'll get more in this session, I think the only way we can get people to walk is we have to make it irresistible. We have to give parks and green places and places that human beings cannot resist. Nobody, when I was growing up, when you went to the lower west side of Manhattan, you wouldn't dream of going for a walk. That was the meatpacking district. They had a rusty old railroad 3 stories above, from about 17th down to 20th Street or so. Nobody went for a walk. And you all know the Beltline is now the 10th most visited tourist site in the whole world. I'm sorry, not Beltline, the High Line. But you had to create a place that people, so that meant that you had to have governance that said this is important. You had to have leadership. And by the way, diabetes, this one just is mind-boggling. I will go quickly on this. 12% of our adults have diabetes, and 36% have prediabetes. So it means we're about half. We're now spending 10 grand a piece on healthcare. When we start harvesting this many people with diabetes, the numbers will go way up. It's 2% of the entire GDP now is diabetes. I can't do the French very well, but you'll see what this Honoré de Balzac, the secret of great fortunes is rested upon a great crime. It also was in The Godfather. And I think this is the second or the next tier of what we're looking at. I think what's happened is we've taken greed from an individual fault, something that we should all be ashamed of if we're guilty of that capital sin, it's called. And we've made it a cultural touchstone. It's seen as a cultural backbone of our society. I'm making this up. Here's a guy that raised the price of a medicine, Daraprim, from $13 to $750 and was quite proud of himself. People almost rioted, by the way, when he came to give a speech at UC Davis last week. This issue of the use of money is really going to be the big issue going forward, and how do we make sure we distribute in a way that really matters? All right, you got nature, we got culture. Guess what? I don't care what the Tea Party says, there's always a boss. There's always going to be governance. You can be in Pelican State Prison and the biggest thug in the place is going to be the boss. Biggest gangs always have a boss. You have to make sure you got good governance, because trying to avoid governance is not going to work. And that's the next pedal in here. And there are people, by the way, I'm sure that Mussolini and Hitler thought that governance was the most important pedal. We should weigh that heavier than all the rest of them. Okay. Is that 5, David? Okay, thanks. We have different choices of governance: monarchy, oligarchy, theocracy, rentier, which is basically very rich people running things, an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. But of course, our Constitution says we want to make sure we have defense and promote the common general welfare and the blessings of liberty. So, God, I love the Constitution. But it's hard. And some of you will be talking about environmental justice. Justice does not happen by accident. It comes with, if you haven't seen the video of John Lewis getting his skull fractured as he's marching peaceably across that bridge in Selma, Alabama, you need to see it, because I showed this in class last week, and about half my class are internationals. They had no idea of just how difficult civil rights was, and what a crime it is to be cutting into the Voting Rights Act, in my opinion. But part of this governance part is, the other thing I teach my students is, if it's boring, it's important. So the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee, they're really important. The Rules Committee. And so who decides where the money goes are really important. This is federal spending on defense and non-defense. This is research spending. I think I clipped the slide badly. But look how much money goes into defense spending versus things, other kinds of non-defense spending. If you look at all non-defense research and development, the blue box is health spending. But more every day, I'm getting some note about, geez, figure out how you can patent something and give UCLA the patent. And the pressure we're under to really turn the medical enterprise into a money-generating enterprise is enormous. This is the kind of governance we're operating under right now. One of the other roles of government is to see that people aren't falling through the bottom and that we have some dispersal of wealth in our society. It offends people. But really the end of the Affordable Care Act, or at least cutting it back, is really about redistributing wealth back up. And so this is Bob Greenstein's assessment of, obviously there'd be twice as many uninsured people after the repeal, 60 million people uninsured. And it looks like the money that would be saved by repealing the act would largely go to people in the absolute top income earners and taken away from the poorest people in our society. I want to put this in here because it is about health and environment. When I was state health officer in California, and I said to Governor Schwarzenegger, my priorities were terrorism preparedness and obesity, and the other one was hospital infections. I had such pushback from the hospitals because they actually viewed hospital infections as a revenue source. And they did not want to be monitoring and counting and really aggressively intervening on hospital infections. We've finally done it. But this first case in American history of somebody with antibiotic-resistant organisms, a woman died in Reno area. I don't know where she got this bug, but this is the end of really a thing. I'm going to have to skip a bit on fracking, and I apologize, but this goes to governance, but it's not just U.S. governance. This is a report from the International Monetary Fund. We've decided under governance, that's the budget committee, that the most important thing is revenue, money, energy, and defense. Basically many societies to start this, and so $10 million of fossil fuel subsidies are given by the governments of the world. That's more money than all the governments in the world spend on medical care. So you all know that we're up for Usexit. How many of you have been doing Usexits? This is like Brexit, but now the U.S. is going to exit, so we're in for it. Infrastructure. I sort of went on a little too long, but universities are infrastructure, education systems, all the rest. That's the next one. Housing is the ultimate infrastructure. In LA, we have 60,000 kids who are homeless. Howie, I was up in Washington State yesterday, 30,000 kids homeless in a state that has more billionaires than any other state in the country. So this dispersal of wealth issue is really an important one. I worry very much about anybody that would take over HUD and not think, housing and urban development, not think that childhood lead poisoning is important, not think that the environments that people are living in is important. And commerce, and the average American thinks that business and commerce, if you can run a business, you can absolutely run a government. And commerce is very different because infrastructure has to be paid for by government. Commerce doesn't pay for infrastructure. It loves infrastructure because it basically floats on the top of infrastructure, but infrastructure is holding up business and commerce. I'm running out of time, but leadership matters. And so California said years ago, we're going to make our refrigerators and air conditioners much more efficient. Every new building has to have deep insulation. Cars have to have, of course, catalytic converters. In the old days, we were the first ones. But now, energy efficient solar and other things are being put in place in California. The economy's going to go to hell, you do all those things. Well, the green line is the GDP of California. We're now up to about number 6 country worldwide. Our population's increased. Our greenhouse gas emissions for everybody have gone down. Per capita, they've gone down 25%. 20%, 15% per capita, and per dollar it's gone down. So you can have a good economy, you can have it. So, and the last but not least is about joy, and it's about life and the things that make it fun. I'm always entertained. When you open the New York Times, they got a style section and a food section and all this stuff from sports. But that's what Americans care. That's what people care about. And a lot of that's got to be done on the back of commerce, because commerce is what generates the wealth that pays for a lot of this. It's not that commerce is bad. It's just not. Commerce is not the big heavy one that's holding everything up. And so here's Maeve and Catherine. They were over at the house at Christmas, and as I said, they're the first girls in my family in 150 years, so we're glad to have them. But I do worry about the world we're giving them. Very quick story. I was a young pediatrician, and this 10-year-old white boy came in, and he had a fist mark on his face. And he had lots of bruises on him. And I put the parents out and I examined him. No blood in the urine, broken bones, neurological. That was okay. And is this child abuse? And I finally said, the law is if you know or suspect child abuse, you have to report. No, it's easy. If you're sure, you're going to report it. If you suspect it, you have to report. And that's very powerful. And you have to act not on overwhelming evidence. So I reported the child. Day and a half later, this great big hulking man appears in the ER, and he looks me in the face. He's this far, he's red in the face, and no one reports my patients to the child abuse authorities. That boy's father is a judge. They are a prominent family in Piedmont, California, and he was berating me. He said, I'm going to get you fired. And fortunately, the law protected me on that. The hospital actually, in the long run, I suspect I did that child and that family a big favor, but it was not a happy week. But this business of taking action when you're not absolutely sure really speaks to climate change. And thinking you have to have a smoking gun before you can actually act. So I think we're really, as a society, we're guilty of child neglect. Child neglect does not mean you have to consciously decide you're going to hurt somebody. It just means a reasonable person would have taken better care. So with that, let's think about balancing all the elements and not overweight any one of them. And thank you for your kind and patient attention. Have a great meeting.